Did you get one?
Welcome to the
I got
York
one.
Daily Record Sunday News Editorial Board. I'm Scott Fisher, Editorial Page Editor, and we are here today with Joe Sestak, who is running for U.S. Senate in Pennsylvania in 2016. And we welcome you here. So
Good to be back.
Yeah, good. So what's going on? Why are you in the area?
Well, as you know, when I announced my candidacy officially back in March, I walked 422 miles across Pennsylvania. I think trust is the largest deficit we have in America, bigger than the national debt. Nobody trusts leaders of either party, and I would argue they don't trust civic or other types of leaders either. So I held up the boots I wore in Afghanistan because I had the Navy's anti-terrorism unit, and I went in at the beginning of the, near the beginning of the war for a very short mission, nothing like the Marines or the Army. Went in, came out, and I said, now I'm going to walk in the shoes of my fellow vets. And each day I'll walk in a different pair of Pennsylvanian shoes. The next day was the poor, the next day it was those women who are human trafficked. You know, 60,000 come in every year, and the conduit is through Bucks County, up near where I live, area there. And so I did that across Pennsylvania because I wanted to earn the trust. And as Scott says, as the narrator of that great book, To Kill a Mockingbird, you can't know a man till you stand in his shoes and walk around them. So I came to know the hopes and challenges. Pardon me? No, you're about the 10th person who asked me that. A little beyond. But then I put out this book because I told people how I wanted to serve. But I think trust is more than just trust me. It's accountability, to where I want to be held accountable not for what I say only, but for my deeds, not my intentions, for what I do. So as I was just telling you, Sarah, this is my contract to say, you know, this isn't a book that says I grew up in a log cabin, now I'm ready to be president. This is one of those books, it's not an autobiography. It is a book that basically says these are the policies, very descriptive, that we need to restore the American dream, to put it back in grasp Pennsylvanians. So the walk was how I want to serve. This is what I want to do and be held accountable for. Not saying one thing in Pennsylvania and vote a different way there. I think that is what Americans here in Pennsylvania need more than anything else.
Can you give us the Cliff Notes version of the book?
Yes.
I have to admit I haven't had
If you go on my
chance to read it.
website, each one, like today, has just a single page version. But what it does is it takes each of the key areas, starting with small businesses, and says, what is this piece to restore the dream? So small businesses, today, it's our star running back, like it was in 1977, creating 70% of all new jobs, but it only creates 18 for every 10,000 working citizens. Back in 1977, it was 35. It's on the football field for half the game. So this says, how do you fix that? Because that's how you really do fix it. They're the job generators. So get them access to the mother's milk, which is capital. Wisconsin did it by a tax credit, not to the small businessman or woman, because they have no income when you start up to write off against, by saying anybody who invests in them begins to get 50% tax credit up to $1 million. They quadrupled in 1 year the number of angel investors. Relieve the burden off of them, and not just say, like everybody says at a chamber, relieve the burden on small business, but specifically how. And so there's one law that's only been used one time called the Negotiated Rulemaking Act, 1999, where small businesses are permitted to have a seat at the table at the beginning of EPA's decision process of how to do a new type of regulation, so that you're able to have them actually relieve what 40% more cost than a corporation for a small business to handle it. And there's more. Then and just today was training. We have less money put into training in America than any other highly developed nation, 1/10 of 1%. But as you know, government ran 47 programs, $18 billion. GAO did a study and said wasteful, fraud, duplicative. Now they tried to clean it up over the last couple of years. But the issue is, every study shows it's whether you have a private company that really does cascade engineering team facilitated by government, facilitated with Wendy, said those guys stay there 6 to 12 months. We'll train them on the weekend. Now they shift over to us. I bring that up because private industry has actually flatlined on training and manufacturing since 2008. So this is not just a governmental problem. This is one where we actually have here in private companies, they're not putting money into training anymore. We need 11 million jobs by 2022 that are not kids going to college. They're the kids I had in the Navy when I had the welders during the Vietnam War era, and the machinist mates, and the interior communication men, which is today telecom people. So that's the type of very prescriptive with ways to do it, from infrastructure to where, as you know, Verizon and Comcast are now the new Standard Oil duopolies of America. Pennsylvania is one of 23 legislatures, I know you've probably looked at this, that has been somehow decided, with a lot of lobbying against them, to mandate that no municipality can have its own internet. So Chattanooga, Tennessee has its own. It's 100 times faster than any other in America, and at less cost. Why does only 10% of our nation, and very little of the rural, have any fiber optic? Well, Hong Kong and Japan have 50%. Well, we have duopolies. We have 25 countries that divide between Verizon and Comcast. Why bother to invest in it? So those are the kind of ways that I, specifically to restore the dream. It's not just about economic, it's not just about income inequality. I want to fix that. But you only got two options: more progressive taxation or benefits from government. And then what do you do next? Unless you get economic mobility where the boats all rise. Was that short enough?
That's it?
No, it's not. It's got one on veterans,
just
foreign
one chapter,
policy,
okay.
Iran. No, but see, so many people think it's single shot, and the key is, and that's why I'm doing this book tour, is a chapter, walk 0.422 miles, which is why I'm dressed like this today. 30 supporters showed up. We walked to represent the walk I did. Just north of you, I walked, and then I shot down for one or two events down here. Mm-hmm. But I want people to know, as I did it in Dauphin today, that hey, I am going to walk in your shoes, but here's training and retraining, or we can't make it. And so this is what you can hold me accountable for achieving.
So as I'm sure you know, and are probably tired of hearing about, a lot of the sort of professional Pauls in Pennsylvania have sort of criticized the walk, saying you should have spent that time raising money and so forth rather than walking across the state. Do you think that this has really been a benefit to your candidacy, or I mean, how has it benefited? I'm sure you.
I don't think you get in to win. I will win. I think you get in to address what most ills America. And if anybody here trusts your politicians, would you raise your hand? For the record, no one's raised their hand. But the issue here is, I do think trust is the biggest deficit, and to gain their trust takes a lot of time, and they need to know what I stand for. If you go on websites for other senatorial candidates, you don't see money prescriptions. Or you read Senator Toomey's book, all he does is beat up on Democrats. I think there's a better way, and so it is. Now, we also were critiqued because I started so early a couple of years ago. You've heard that too, right?
Sure, yeah.
So we probably have more money today than any other Senate candidate who is not an incumbent. We planned this. You know, successful generals go to war, successful generals win, then they go to war. This was part of the plan.
Just so it's clear, some of us did raise our hand. It's like politicians are like a lot of things. You know, you can trust them in many ways, and other ways they may be mistaken. And there's some, just like in any other profession, there's some that you can't trust. So your question was kind of absolute.
You're right. It was a little absolute. Look, I joined up during the Vietnam War era. The confidence factor, the trust factor of the military at that time was 22%. When I left it, because of great leaders like General Powell and others, I left at 78%. I went to Congress, which was at 22%, and now it's 9%. So I think statistically and factually, 9% of people seem to trust the political leaders. But there are some that do. And some do make mistakes. I was on WSBA today with Gary again. Love that show. We talked about Iraq. Some people voted for it and have apologized because they just made a mistake, which also gets to a point, though. That's to my party and the other one. We do need people down there who have some background in military affairs and understand that militaries can stop a problem. We just can't fix it. Even Nazi Germany took the Marshall Plan to fix it. And I don't think anybody thinks we fixed Iraq yet. So I don't disagree with your point, but on the whole, the facts seem to show, and my time of doing 200 events a year for other people throughout this state shows that on the whole, Americans in Pennsylvania just really don't trust their political or other leaders.
On that Iraq question, it's
Yes.
become with the Jeb Bush and so forth,
Yeah.
and would you have gone, I should know this, but where were you on the Iraq war, in terms of, did you think that we should have gone in there?
I was active duty at the time,
Okay.
and
But
I
what did you
and I
think?
commanded an aircraft carrier battle group in Afghanistan. After I came out, I was ordered to go into the Straits, through the Straits of Hormuz, to begin what some thought at the time, if you read books, was going to be a running start to the war. And the 3rd Fleet commander at the time, or the fleet commander at the time, I went in to see him because I was just a battle group commander. And, reported in and said, ready to go. And he said, what do you think about this? I said, sir, we are ready to go. And he said, no, I'm asking your personal opinion. And I said, this is a tragic misadventure. If for no other reason, we're dividing our forces. But second, it's no clear danger to us. And it certainly isn't a present danger. Why are we doing this? But he said, that's my personal opinion. That's what I said at the time, but I was a warrior. And no matter what, unless it's morally or ethically wrong, as you well said, some people made a mistake here, all right? Then you do what your duty calls for. When I ran in 2006, I did run that Iraq was wrong because it was harming our national security. When I asked, because we could not respond to any other war plan with the Army. When I asked that of the Chief of Staff when I became a congressman, can we respond with the Army, with the 4 divisions needed in Op Plan 5047, or whatever it is, to defend South Korea? He said no. But the Navy and the Air Force will fill in. Well, then why do we need them today? And so my take was it was harming us because of that. But when I ran, I really did run on national security begins at home, and health security, economic security, because as you know, my daughter had brain cancer. I was an independent. I didn't care about politics. I voted. Whenever you might get your absentee ballot in Persian Gulf, which often showed up after the election. But I was running on health security. I ran on what's now called Romney Care,
Right, yeah.
2006.
Yeah.
And I cared that healthy, educated youth gave me a good defense, because youth are so much greater in America because with that type of ability to use the machines of war better than others. But I thought it was a tragic misadventure, Iraq, at the time.
In terms of the situation now, what if you were in the Senate right
Yeah.
now, where would you be pushing for us?
I'll be
to
going
head?
on television at 5 tonight, probably being asked by the same question, and I was asked this several times over
You're
the
on
years.
television now, in a way.
Yes, but this one's more important because it's local. Let me tell you. And so I'll say here what I'll say tonight, or I said over the last few years. I think the Obama administration was slow to respond to ISIS. It was a year ago from February, so now about 14, 15 months, they were in Fallujah, 60 miles from Baghdad. There was the testimony in Congress that said that. We did not do anything to August. We were slow once again, as we were in providing arms, arms to the moderates in Syria. Because we gave them radios, and we don't do it out of charity. We put chips in them so we can figure out who's who at the zoo. And we figured that out in about 6 months. But as you probably read in the papers, you probably even reported it. And 6 months ago, we're still trying to get those arms out there. The execution is terrible. But the strategy when we finally did it in August was correct. We should not have boots on the ground, except for some special forces. But we should train the Kurds to come south and the government of Baghdad to use theirs to come this way, where we're the artillery from the sky. There's a setback here. It's going to be a challenge. But we cannot permit ISIS to have a safe haven in the middle of Iraq, because when we started this, they had $400 million. They're a pretty rich terrorist group. And for them, and the biggest weapon we have is the Treasury Department clamping down on them. So they can't do damage against us with that money. So this isn't just about warfare. We had to decimate them, take them out, move them out from the oil fields. This is a multi-agency effort. But the reason I say no boots on the ground, much like I felt Iraq, is you always weigh the cost and the benefits. There is worth to have special forces on the ground. I can remember in Afghanistan, and I was only there for a very short moment, but my classmate was there and told the story of how he took his laser and pointed it at a target across the valley. General, probably was his cheek, said, and the place blew up. He said, "How'd you do that? Is that a magic wand?" He said, "No, it takes the laser and guide it on down." He said, "Do it again." So the next day there was another target, and he did it. This was the beginning of the war. And then he said, "Now, turn it on him," which was a fellow general, but was probably a Pushta. You can't give our lasers control of our artillery from the sky to the Sunnis and the Shias unless you know that they're not going to turn it on one another. So there's value practically in doing it. But I think we were slow, and I think it's the right approach. Syria's different. That's a pretty bad
We were
neighborhood.
slow to do what? What should we have done quicker?
We should have done exactly what we started doing in August. When they started moving in the December time frame through February time frame before they got encapsulated in there. Because it's harder to dig someone out than it is to stop them as they're moving across the deserts. Once they got in the cities, 60 miles from Baghdad, yes, we did know. DNI, or I think it was DNI, went in and testified. This is going to be our problem. But they were slow to have got them when they were in the open. It's easy for me to critique. I understand that. But you know, the number one constitutional duty of the Senate, where the testimony was provided, by the way, and the number one constitution of the president is the defense of the nation. And that is a clear and present danger over a fairly short period of time against us to have them with $400 million in a large safe haven in Iraq.
What would you say are the number one or two most important contrasts between you and Pat Toomey? What is this campaign going to come down to? What's it really all
Trust.
about? But can you be more specific
Sure.
on that?
Senator Toomey voted to send me to war. I have a picture with him on my aircraft carrier when he came out there. He came home and he has said, here in York County, among other places, I care about our vets. Their suicide rate is too high. We got to do something about the backlog. And yet he's voted against every Veterans Administration appropriations bill since the day he voted to send us to war. He said suicide rate is too high. And he voted against the bipartisan $21 billion medical health benefits bill 2 years ago. Take Alzheimer's. He's had 6 press conferences saying we need more resources for Alzheimer's here in Pennsylvania. He now voted against the NIH bill 3 times, but the bipartisan $122 million to actually increase resources, which passed, he voted against. Take the PTC. He railed for 3 years, held a subcommittee hearing over this control system, that it was a government boondoggle that shouldn't be done. And yet the day after Amtrak, he quietly took the letter off his website and other things, as the Amtrak board came out and said it wouldn't have happened if we'd had PTC involved. Take women. Filibustered Paycheck Fairness Act 6 times, and yet just the other day in his newsletter he had a bunch of businesswomen in saying, I'm working with him to how better address issues for women. Human trafficking. He has held up in Bucks County where I was, saying we must do more in order to help human trafficking, no matter what it takes, and yet has voted 3 times to shut down the human trafficking office in the Justice Department that goes out and finds them. If you go on my website, each day of those events that I walked, I did a contrast sheet that said, in his words, judge me not by what I say, but what I do. That was his quote. And I very clearly lay that out.
Okay, I get those, and I do read them. I just wanted to know what you see as probably the most important issue in this campaign. Assuming you're nominated by the party.
I find the most important issue is trust, as I said. But you probably want something that's an intangible. I understand that. But I know that if the crew of a ship feels the captain is above accountability, why trust him? And then the U.S. ship of state, the United States, begin to disintegrate into just chaos, like is happening in the Senate. Why should anybody trust? But if I had to pick one or two to say what really do you need to move back on to do what I think is most important, because instead of that salary I took, I went to teach up the road at Carlisle, at Dickinson, the Army War College, Penn State, as well as Carnegie Mellon and Cheney University. the two courses, one ethical leadership and the other restored memory. It was a research course, you know. I don't tell my wife this, but Napoleon said it well. If I were to be in love, I would analyze it bit by bit because you cannot ask how or why enough. This hits hard on Democrats equally as, hardly mentions Republicans, but to say what really needs to be done factually. Small business, look, people talk about it all the time. I was vice chairman of the Small Business Committee as a freshman. It normally takes you 16 years or so to become vice chairman, never mind a chairman. I thought they wanted to show Congress had a sense of humor. No, there's no PAC money for small business, but everybody mouths it. And yet, if you watch census data of small businesses from 1977 till today, 35 new small businesses, as I mentioned, for 10,000 working citizens, all the way down to 18 today. Senator Toomey has voted 3 times to shut down the Small Business Administration, to shut down the 100 women business development centers. And yet, women today, even though they own 33% of all small businesses, only get 3.5% of all bank loans to small businesses. And even though it's mandated, 23% of all contracts go to the small business. And I know, I ran the Navy's, $70 billion warfare program. I had to work with small businesses. And they're nimble and they're fast. Only 4% goes. So there are ways to get all hands on deck, and it's very specific in here. So I told you about the tax credit. In the Small Business Administration, we have the 7A and the 504C loans. The best time the SBA ever performed was in the Nixon era. I mean, I've gone back in history and met with a guy, talked to him yesterday actually again, who was there on those days where there wasn't political appointees, but you actually would double, a veterans or a minority type of access that to these mother's milk, the loans coming up. And so specifically they're in here. But burdens, we have a small office. They are called the Small Business Advocacy Office. It has 11 lawyers. Last year they saved $2.5 billion of regulatory burden on small businesses. Imagine if you doubled it to maybe 22, all right? And all of a sudden they relieve $5 billion in all. Because we make these rules and don't understand it costs 4 times as much today to start up a small business as it did in 2005. And so if I had to do anything, it would be here, because in Pennsylvania, we are the second oldest state for a reason. We have as many babies per family as any other state. But the youth don't stay here for a reason. It's not about Corbett. It's not about Rendell or any other previous governors. It's about all
you're
of
in wolf territory, come on.
He hasn't had enough time yet. The last 35 years, Pennsylvania has had half the small business growth, just a little over, of the national average. They create 7% of all jobs. Therefore, our small business, our job creation has been exactly half, 30% during that period of time, instead of 60%. So when you look into the state tax and see that the tax credits are given to corporations instead of the guy who needs it, the small businesses, I'd say that's where the job creation comes again. And that's why Senator Toomey's opposition to the Export-Import Bank is
Yeah, I
so
want to ask
harmful.
you about that, because I'm running an op-ed piece by Scott Perry, who's our congressman
Yes.
here, about
Scott.
that, basically saying, hey, I'm hearing a lot of people in the district saying, hey, you need to support this and
Yes.
so forth, but I'm not, because I think too much of this money is going to big businesses and not enough to the small.
That's an easy fix. Just say you can't have more than 500 people and you're not allowed to participate. But understand, to understand that of the 6,000 contracts, and I'll send you the stats, all right? 2/3 of all those contracts that are let via the Export Bank are to small businesses. 95% of all the capital insured loans are to small business of the Export-Import Bank. And 90% of all the insurance for accounts receivables are to small businesses. In fact, in 2013, we produced $3.5 billion profit that went back to the Treasury. It's a profit-making business. There's no government money that has been lost. Now, last year, there was a
They
study
point
by
to Solyndra,
CRS that
They
said
say the Solyndra case and so forth.
cylinders, well, yeah, the cylinder's the solar power one.
Right.
Let me step back. That's a different issue, but I think it's a very important issue. As you know, we have fracking going on. Who doesn't know? But they wouldn't be here today if your United States Navy, at the cost of hundreds of millions of dollars, didn't develop the sonar for them. We took it, we developed the sonar to go down because they can't see down there. So we basically gave them a mammogram. The Department of Energy then poured hundreds of millions of dollars into developing, I should just say $100 million, into developing the diamond bit drill because, as you probably read, one CEO of natural gas industry said a few years ago, we wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for the government. We gave them $10 billion of tax credits from 1977 to 2003. And suddenly, we have natural gas cheaper than coal. We invested in it. Much like we used to, and unfortunately still do, did it to oil for a while. So today, for us to recognize that we discovered the solar power panel, and we discovered the wind turbine, and China and other countries do 95% of all the exports of it, how can you not do something not dissimilar to what we did for natural gas? I'll give you the facts, but over 92%, if I have it right, and please, this fact I'm just a little off on, because you've asked a great question that I haven't been asked for a while, of the ones they invested in have done well. But whether it's the Trans-Intercontinental Railroad under Republican President Lincoln, or the Interstate Highway System, or the Student Loan Program under the Republican President Eisenhower, or whether it's under your favorite Republican President Nixon with the Environmental Protection Agency or the Legal Services Corporations Act, we, the people, the government, have invested. It's whether it's held accountable. And I have to agree with those that feel we don't do it. One last fact. Natural gas, $1 million put into it, 1 job per minute. Coal, 2. Solar power, 3.5. Wind turbine, 4.5. So this isn't just about tree hugging. This is about jobs and regaining them from China, because right now today it costs almost as much to produce in China than it does here because of the shipping cost. There's only so much shipping, and it's now been all used up, basically. Costs are going, and diesel fuel has shot up. I just talked to a friend of mine in Springfield that said, I'm closing 3 factories in China. One's going to Vietnam, one's going to Bangladesh, and one's coming to America. This is our moment, which is why I had the thing on retraining. 11 million jobs are needed to take those jobs that are about to come home if we do it well. Export-Import Bank, it is for small businesses. If they don't like the welfare waste, I'm all for that. Cut them off. But why? For a small business, who's he know who to deal with over in China for accounts receivable? That's why that insurance is so important, and 90% of it goes to a small business. And the fact goes back that they create 70% of all jobs, and the fact goes back that Pennsylvania's hurting the worst on it. As I already showed you, we've created half the small businesses of the nations. We've had 246 small businesses use it, as you know, over the last few years here in Pennsylvania, small.
Mm-hmm. And what if we could just back up a little bit to your walk across PA?
I loved it.
Yeah. What were the couple things that you learned?
Yeah.
You know, what were people saying?
The most memorable thing, probably because it was from another party, is I was walking with this Democrat who disagreed with me on Iran, whatever, and Palmera, I think it was. Not the one that's been in the news, the ones that's and a guy comes out from a car dealership and yells out and says, Admiral Sestak, I love what you're doing, and I'm a Republican. Look, I had over 50 people offer me a ride. I'm walking up a mountain, and these mountains are cold and long. And I'd finish at 2, 3 in the morning, and then I starting early, and this young woman comes down the mountain as I'm going up. These are roads, by the way, okay? I'm not sure. And she stops the car. She says, hey, are you okay? Do you need a ride? I guess what I'm saying is, I think there's a lot more about the Commonwealth, a lot more about the United States of America. So, you know, we can disagree, but why do we have to be divisive? If I took anything out of it, it was that. It was why a Tea Party guy showed up at my event today. And before I came down here, I went back to talk to him because I had a 15, 20 minutes because I didn't have time to. Don't get me wrong, I think we leaders embrace conflict of ideas. Do you know what I mean? It's what's America about. It's why you exist, to hold up a mirror. But that more than anything. And then whenever I'd say trust, it would always go, well, you know, you're a little different. I get that. Everybody's different. But they'd just say, you're right.
You know, most people don't talk about in terms of politics, though. I mean, most people just, you know, we were talking before you got in, you know, some people just, they want to know where they're going to take their dog this weekend, you know, because they want to go away, you know, and what kennel they're going to go to, or the Central League umpiring quality or something of that nature. You know, I mean, how do you get this political speak out of people? I mean,
Yeah, no, it's a great question. Because I think real leaders look at the same set of facts that everybody's looking at and tries to show them through a different prism in order to galvanize them. And how they do that is important. So the way I do it, as I would tell my classes, if I go into Elk County, pretty conservative, and I want to talk about the Affordable Care Act, I look at what their need is and try to raise it to a different want. You know, it's like you have a baby. The mom doesn't give the baby. Baby needs to quench its thirst, but it tries to raise it to a higher desire. So it doesn't give it whiskey or water. It gives it milk to try to. So when I go into Elk County, I don't talk about the Affordable Care Act and what it does for, let's say, 4 million Americans don't have health care. What I say is address what is a real need for them, and I understand it. Do you like freeloaders? No, I don't. You know, there's millions of Americans freeloading on your health care. What do you mean? You know, when if someone goes into York and they go into a hospital, they don't have health insurance, you pay for it. No, you're kidding. No, it's true. The emergency room doesn't pay for it, passes on to the insurance company and the rates they do, and you pay about $1,500 more a year because of the underinsured. You're kidding me. No, why don't you? And then I say, look, this is a freeloader issue. Why don't we mandate that they have to have health care and pay some of it? Sounds good to me. Well, now let me tell you about the rest of the Affordable Care Act. I tend to do it from where they come from. That's why there was no gimmick. I did walk around in their shoes to understand where they come from. You go through Westmoreland County, there's no regulations there. Not all of county, one municipality. You want to build a McMansion or a trailer park there, you don't have to ask permission. There's no zoning ordinances. Well, when you're talking to them, it's not exactly you start off with the EPA. You might say small businesses should be at the beginning of that table there before they start mandating, you know, on it. So I guess that's how I do it. Where's that guy in the car dealership come from? I remember if I had time, I would have said to him, hey, can I talk to you about the Car Dealer Association? I said, you know, what do you think of the economic stimulus bill? Ugh. I said, you know, they came down to me as a congressman and begged us to help them out in this thing. And I would have come, I said, because so many of you are going under, can we talk about the impact? That's how I would have done it. It's like a sailor on a ship. I used to go down after the last plane came home from Afghanistan or Iraq, sit on the mess decks, because, you know, the aircraft carrier is open 24 hours a day, free food. In any case, I would sit there and talk to the sailors at 2 or 3 in the morning because, you know, the boys and gals were home and I could talk with them, but it was to listen to where they come from. I'm not asking them to agree with me on this, but I'm asking that I came to it in a logical way from where they see things.
give an example or two just of what they would say to you. You know, just you're in Elk County, you're in Westmoreland County, and you're walking through there, or you're walking through Mount Wolf in York County. I don't know if you made it through, if you took that route, but you know.
No, not that
Yeah.
one.
What would the common man say to you?
When I met with most people, besides people who would walk with me, all right, which is not an insignificant number, but probably about over the course of the 424 miles, I mean, for more than a mile, probably about 30, 40. You know, some did 18, some did 12. I mean, there was 30 or 40 who'd always do a mile after the event. By and large, where I met most people was that event, all right, except I do an op-ed board. You know, I do an Eagle Scout award because people knew I was coming through and they'd ask me. By and large, what people would say was at the event, where it was open. We almost always did it in a public forum. It's not like Senator Toomey's where it's by invitation only, all right? He's only had one open town hall, and he had, that was up in Potter County where you couldn't get to, but it was open. To a large extent, I would say it came back, and I know it seemed to come back, and I'll maybe not be answering your question as well. For whatever reason, it always seemed to start off with education. I don't know why. But by the second or third question, I'd always say, what do you think, because I was interested, about trust, and every head would go like that. I don't think I'm answering your question very well, though.
I was in the coffee shop this morning, and the woman behind the counter said, I said, when are you going to Disney World? And she said, 4 months from now, probably. It's going to take me that long to save up, but I'm going to go. Yeah. And I said, you're going to fly or drive? That's how people talk.
Yeah, it is. Guy was there, came to the shop. Well, that's why people talked about education. How do I send my kid to education? I mean, that to a large extent, as I think was fairly or unfairly, because we all know how that debate was about that money, okay, in terms of how you looked at it. I can't send my kid off to school, and the schools right here are hurting. They're closing art classes and other things. I think those are pretty personal, because except for health care, I don't think there's anything more personal to your family. I know. My daughter was given 3 to 9 months to live after the first brain operation, Walter Reed, and only 8% of kids ever survive glioblastoma, and she's one of them. It's pretty personal. But the education comes next, I find all the time. But I will say this. There was a gentleman who came. I came all the way here. He came from another county to talk to you. I've been unemployed for a year and a half. I applied for a McDonald's job, and they told me I was too educated in order to take the job. Yeah, I got all those kinds of stories. I don't disagree. Look, when I did those on average, I have 260,000 miles on my car. When I did those events over the last 2 years, first year I went to every place. They weren't all Democratic events. I did rural development events. I did life sciences events. I did a Republican who was running for a job in Philadelphia, because I don't think it should all be one party, and independent events. Yeah, I had all those stories. From autism, I'll never forget numbers of people would come up and say, what are you doing for autism? This year in this county, 175 kids will be born. One out of every 75 kids born will have autism. When I began running, it was 1 out of 125. Autism Speaks just came out last week and went from 1 out of 85 to 1 out of 75. Now, some of it we are finding to eat more readily, but it is an epidemic and they don't know quite why. I had a person who came up and just had to talk about opiates, time and again. You're familiar with the epidemic we're having, more deaths in Westmoreland County by opiates and the others. Those things come out. I think to some extent, if you're looking at someone who's running for Senate, people who come up tend to want to have what I call a special interest. And special interest is an autistic thing. And I told the Chief of Naval Operations when I called him and said, I'm going to get back in, and he said, why? I said, after saying I want to serve, best education in the world. You learn, I would have been a better naval officer because I get to see where the families come from. Autism, Alzheimer's, cancer. I said that to a journalist once. You know what they said? Sounds like me in my job. I get to invite myself everywhere. So I don't know if I'm answering you, but I could give you scores of stories. A woman who is still fighting, a gentleman who's still fighting Agent Orange who came to one event. Because on naval ships, and I'm a naval officer, if you were not brown water Navy, but you were blue water Navy within 10 miles, you're denied, and he's dying of cancer. And he's fighting to try to get that recognized. I think that's pretty personal. It's not Walt Disney, but it is pretty personal. So people tend to come up to you, I think, if you're running, not just about their travels, but about what most impacts their family. Am I answering your question, though? I feel as though I've shot past you in a bad way.
I'm just trying to test it here or probe here. A lot of times elected officials or prospective officials, they put everything through a political filter. And they become unreal in that way.
No, it's true. Look, here's what I also do, and I don't bring this up because, I go to a prison every year, for example. I did it as a congressman, I do it now because I want the vets there. I think I'm not going to show up at Veterans Day. But I also have a kid on my staff who was in jail for 5 years. I don't bring that up here to tell you that. We were walking on that first day through Philadelphia, and it was pretty hard-bitten part of town. And he said, I'm going to walk with you. And a reporter came with us, National Review. And I could hear him chatting behind me. I was talking to somebody walking with me. And I heard Ray say, don't walk on that side of the street. The guy goes, why? He said, because the drug dealers are over there. And they want to look someone like you walking through here. And he said, how do you know? He said, I was a drug dealer. Look, I slept overnight in an African-American church that night. Pretty hard-bitten part of town. When I ran the last time, I went to 200 African-American churches, but I also went to Assembly of God up the road here because my party wouldn't let me in Philadelphia or Pittsburgh go to Democratic events. The leaders of those things say, no. When I say walk in your shoes, I spend a lot of time, whether it's prison that I go to, every Veterans Day, graded for maximum security prison. Sit there for 2-3 hours. They always have me speech. I get more invitations you can shake a stick at to go to prisons. No, I understand what you're saying. But I grew up with the kids that the judge would say the Navy or jail. And I don't feel it's any difference for a parent with autism or anything. So I don't disagree with you, but that's the trust issue. And I think you're right to be skeptical.
Let me drag you back through the political filter then. So Katie McGinty sat in that chair yesterday talking to us about Governor Wolf's budget. She's been rumored to be a potential U.S. Senate candidate. The party seems not totally settled on you as the candidate. Why is that? Why can't you seem to get along with the Democratic Party in Pennsylvania?
Well, I don't know if I don't get along. It's just that they have, in Washington, D.C., a certain perspective, and that's okay. And I don't mind who gets in. I mean, how could I when they had asked me to run against Senator Specter, and I'd said no several times. And then the fourth time I said yes. And then Senator Specter switched parties, but I decided, after putting my family through the thought process, I should stay in. So I'm far above saying anybody should not get in, and I'd welcome anybody. Mm-hmm. It's a democratic process.
Okay. George, do you have any questions?
What's your take on what the White House is doing with Iran?
I think that we should verify before we trust, if I could play in Ronald Reagan's words. But I did a study 2 years ago with about 30, 40 generals, admirals, and national security experts, and I've operated in those waters. Iran should not get a nuclear weapon, and the military option to take it down needs to be on the table, but it should be on the back of the table. Because two major issues. We can strike, but the strike will be wide in breadth, deep in scope. Because, for example, there's 18 midget submarines sitting in that Gulf, and 4 kilos. We cannot pick them up with our sonar. We pass Chinese diesel submarines with 1,000 miles and don't pick them up. But in those murky, shallow waters, we can't, so we'll keep our carriers out. There's also hundreds, thousands of rockets and missiles that rain down not just on naval forces or bases in the UAE, but also Israel. We will shut them down after numerous strikes, at most 4 years. As I mentioned, militaries can stop a problem, we just can't fix it. But we will do it if we must. But if we can verify in June, have the verification means, much like Ronald Reagan or Nixon, President Nixon did with the Soviet Union on the SALT and the START talks. And here's what we've accomplished. Today, within 30 days, they can have a fissile material that can explode. But they've already begun, as you probably know, to dilute 22% enriched uranium to 4%. It takes a year to bring it back up. And then 30 days to go from 22 to 100. That's where it is, and we're bringing it down. The centrifuges are going to be put into storage, and if you know much about centrifuges, they're delicate. Putting them into storage isn't just where they can come back. You probably have to recreate a number of them. our security from having a nuclear weapon material in their hands will go from 30 days to 1 year. If the option is more economic sanctions right now, because we're not making them hurt enough and get whatever more is, who thinks China or Russia, after having this deal, are going to say, yep, I'm more for more sanctions? Because Russia is already having, you've seen in the papers. And that's where the real art was of diplomacy, was getting enough of those nations to bind down on it. And so when they open up and material comes in, and they do proceed with a nuclear weapon, what are your choices? It's to bomb them, which you have anyway. But with a propensity that potentially, before you send my brethren and sisters to war, and then vote against every Veterans Administration bill since then, as Senator Toomey did, with no skin in the game, to be able then to say, wait a minute, let's see if we can verify this, I think is the common sense thing to do. Because Saudi Arabia has Pakistan helping it in Yemen today, as you've noticed. That's not brand new. Saudi Arabia and Pakistan, with his 1,000 scientists trained at the most radical of the institutions, that is a union that has been made so Saudi Arabia can develop a bomb if Iran does. This will beget an arms race. Never mind, when we strike, it'll make the aftermath of Iraq look like a cakewalk because of Iran. It's 4 times the size, large population, terrorist organizations, none of which Saddam had, and that was not a clear and present danger. As General Powell said, if you break it, you own it. And now we have splinter groups. So my take is that I wish we had more men and women down there that understood the cost and the benefits of how to go about the world. I think that letter by Senator Toomey and others to the Ayatollah was dangerous. It wasn't about President Obama and saying dismiss him only. It was about our presidency. That again, if they don't, we should walk away in a heartbeat if we don't get the verification.
You have another?
You're an author, we got to give you a chance to show your book.
Thank you.
And if you want to hold up and give us just why people should read that book.
This is my contract with you. Walking in your shoes to restore the American dream. The majority of American Pennsylvania families today are earning $4,000 less in income, including benefits, today than they did in 1999, where only 40% of all families had 2 partners working. Today, it's 60%. Doubling down, working harder, but yet earning less. It is about family and having the opportunity to have your children do more than you. This is my contract to say, hold me accountable, not for my words only, but for my deeds, that I accomplish it, like a good captain of a ship, being not above accountability. And if you care to see it, read it. It's on my website, joesestak.com. It's S-E-S-T-A-K, Slovak. Thank you very much. And I'm going to sign it to give to Sarah.
All right.
With the contract that I left right here that said, this book is your contract to hold me accountable for the results. Beginning to be accountable for the trust of people. Thank you
Thank you.
very much.
I appreciate it.
You have one,
Appreciate
you
your
have
time.
one, and you have one. Oh, I got to sign it.
New contract.
Sure.
That's all right. We don't make anything on this. If we do, we get, sometimes like 50 cents or stuff. I mean, it depends upon how many you ship, and so we turn that into the Brain Tumor Institute, where my daughter was saved, so.
Good.
George Sepik.
That's me.
Oh, it's not, yeah.
To George or whatever.
I'll sign it right here. I know you'll read this.
Every word.
If you don't do anything, just the prologue, it's a page and a half, and then the first, thank you, George. The first chapter is really my, I was teaching this course, and it was based on a book in 1978. Am I still on?
No, yeah, well, you are,
Okay.
yeah.
It doesn't really matter, just,
No, go.
And called Leadership by James McCragen Burns, who just passed away. And it's not about management or how to run a company. It was the first kind of theory of why in a democracy eventually people tend to have more transactional leadership. You know, I'll do this for you if you do this for me, rather than the transformational type of Martin Luther King or someone could bring about. But in it goes through what I think is important is our Constitution, by and large, which the Tea Party and many people understand rightly, is government thou shalt not, you know, do this. But except for we the people, where we can prescribe whatever the Constitution proscribed. And so that's the battle you're going through today, is we've had hundreds of years before our forefathers where they had learned text to say, you know, in England, that government sure interferes with my freedom, you know, my home is not my castle. So they came over here, and by and large, the Constitution says thou shalt not. You know, the Whiskey Rebellion that we had, you know what I mean, that George Washington had to come and put down. What do you mean you're taxing me? And so we've had this battle because we the people is just a phrase a Pennsylvanian Governor Morris gave to James Madison, you know, and said, here's where it begins. And the problem is that there's no, you know, it's kind of like Lincoln saying, I'm going to build a transcontinental air road. Or it's kind of, you know, Eisenhower saying, I'm going to do the interstate highway system. There's no intellectual kind of tone that gets you down to thought and why. And I think that's the battle we're going through. And what I mention in here is my party sometimes goes this way. It's all about the common good. The other party leadership sometimes goes this way. You're all on your own. And it's how to bring those two together. Balanced, you know, where SEAL Team 6 is rugged individuals, but they have one another's back and ready to put the resources in. And I think that's when you look at this, and I'm not out, you know, someday you'll write an op-ed and have to beat me up about something, heaven forbid, but if you do, at least you'll find that's how small business, or that's how I looked at natural gas. Wait a minute, guys, I'm not out to tax that 4.5% or 5%. I invested in you with my taxpayer money to develop a sonar for you. You're like a bond. I want a 5% return. So when I talked to 60 natural gas producers, I didn't walk in and say, to your point, how do you get off politics? Says, you know, I want to tax you. I say, you know, I put $10 billion in you, tax credits. I invested in you, and how about just give me a 4%, 5% bond return, which I could have gotten probably 17% on junk bonds up there in Wall Street when you asked me to do this, because you were a junk bond back in 1977. But I'm only going to ask 5%. And that's how I try to turn it into, let's look at the same set of facts to where you live. And I think I've taken enough of your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Nice meeting you, Joe. Thank you. I appreciate it.